All right, so what's going on, guys? So in today's video, we're going to start the teardown of the Galant. Of course, as you guys should already know, I do have a spun bearing in here. I didn't bother to inspect the crank just because I did see some metal in the oil. So I'm willing to bet that's not usable, which is why I told you guys I was going to go with a junkyard block, which is what this is here. So, of course, you guys saw me pull this. This actually came out of a Stratus, a Dodge Stratus. Fun fact about that I didn't know was that the Galant, it seems to be the only platform that uses this engine that didn't come with a knock sensor, because the Stratus and the Eclipse both have a knock sensor, which probably is what helped save this motor and keep it intact once it lost oil pressure. Even though I could hear the knock, it is pretty audible. So, you know, I would have been careful with it anyway. But overall, it's in pretty good shape. I did listen for the compression, and I felt for the compression. Checked the oil for any metal. All that seemed to check out. So this should be a good candidate for a replacement. So of course, I'm not just going to slap this thing in here. I'm actually going to be replacing the oil pump and deleting the balance shaft, as well as replacing the clutch. Because as I told you guys, the spec stage 2 with street disc that's in here is actually already slipping at just 10 pounds. So I'm going to replace it. So what I've got over here, parts I'm going to use. So I'm also going to be upgrading to some ARP head studs. Of course, you guys know, you can see the part number there, that I use head bolts. And at 10 pounds, they didn't show any signs of the head lifting or anything like that. So the head bolts were good to go for at least 10 pounds. That has been confirmed at least for a couple hundred miles. Next, I have this oil pump. This is an ACL oil pump. So I went back and forth debating on whether or not to go with an OEM oil pump or this thing. Now, I've used an ACL oil pump before on my GSX. I didn't have any problems with it. It seems to be pretty high quality. It's not really a cheap part. Between this and the OEM one, you save about 40 bucks. So it's really up to you to decide whether or not that is worth the cost. But seeing as how this motor in here, I really only need it to last through this summer, and then maybe a little bit of next year, because it should be getting built if everything goes according to plan, over the winter. So went ahead, get a decent quality. Again, this thing has good reviews. I've used this product before, granted that was a long time ago, so that's why I went with that. Now, so here at the bottom, this is not something that you see a lot of in like the Mitsubishi Evo community, right? This is an action clutch. This is their stage 3 with a 6-puck. Of course, I'll unbox it for you guys later. Now, I went with Action just because they were one of the only companies that actually had a clutch in stock. Of course, if you're in the same situation that I am and we need a clutch, you probably ought to notice that most of your major sites are out of all ACT products. At least they're on back order for now, and they're not going to ship for another couple of weeks, according to like Summit and MA Performance and websites like that, the normal ones that I check. I've heard a lot of good things from the Honda community about Action Clutch. They're relatively inexpensive without being super cheap, so that's why I went with them. And they always have discount codes. Of course, they're always out there on YouTube. You see them supporting car enthusiasts. So I figured I'd give them a try, and they had the clutch in stock, so that made it even better. So like I said, today we're just gonna get everything set up to be able to pull this thing out. So what we're gonna do, I'll remove the turbo setup, the downpipe, of course, drain the oil and drain the coolant, and really just get a lot of these accessories off and have this thing ready to be pulled out. So that's kind of like the obvious stuff, but you also don't want to forget about your power steering lines. Like if you have your AC hooked up, you're going to need to disconnect all that stuff. So fortunately, I do have my AC lines hooked up, but I never got it recharged, so I don't have to worry about that, because technically you're supposed to take your AC to a company and have them drain it for you, because this stuff is really bad for the environment. So just looking at this, you see there's no major gouges on the cylinder head. Of course, we'll have to do some work to this to get it prepped, so you make sure you stay tuned for that in a future video. That's another thing that you want to check for. You want to be careful when you're pulling this at the junkyard that you don't gouge this up, because that could potentially cause some sealing issues. The good thing about these cars is you can pretty much completely disassemble them with like a 10 and a 12. So you don't need a whole lot. You don't need some massive kit. 10 or 12, a 14 or 17 will pretty much get this engine out. But for the most part, a small mechanics kit will get you started and have you able to be able to pull something like this. So my first step is going to be to disconnect the battery. Pretty much anytime you're working on a car, you want to make that your first step. I'm going to reattach my battery tender. So if you guys don't know, batteries will discharge just naturally over time, and that's what I have hooked up here. Is just a trickle charger. I actually used this for my motorcycle when I had one, and this thing does a pretty good job of keeping the battery fully charged. Here's your one. That's something like this. Can charge the battery from completely dead, but it will take a while. So it's not a jumper box or anything like that. So now that my battery is disconnected, I'm actually going to remove my bumper next because I'm going to pull off my intercooler piping. And for that, obviously, I need to get to this clamp down here in the front. Now, something else you may want to keep handy is some bags or containers or whatever you're going to need just to keep everything organized. Because I can guarantee you that you are not going to remember where all this stuff goes once you get to putting everything back together. All right, so now that we fished this thing out of here, you can really see it's pretty simple. It only uses 2 couplers, one on each end. Trey did a good job with the welding of everything on. This is a knockoff towel, and of course I have the GM IET sensor on the back of it so I can run speed density. So next I'm going to remove my intake. I believe it's a Force Performance intake. It's a 4-inch intake pipe, and of course it doesn't use a MAF. This should be a 10 as well. Of course, you can see this pipe is huge. It's got a Vibrant elbow on it and a Spectra air filter. And just like that, the engine bay already looks completely different, even though we haven't done a whole lot. So now I'm going to start removing the turbo kit. Remember, your exhaust manifold has 2 different size bolts on it. There's going to be a 12 for the inner bolts, and then the outside ones are 14s. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just how it is. Now, unfortunately, because of the way this manifold is shaped, I'm not going to be able to use my impact to get all of these out. So like I said, with the design of the manifold, I was only able to get 4 of these nuts off. The rest of them are going to have to come off with a wrench. Alright, so I've got all the nuts loose on the top side. Again, because of the design of the manifold, you actually can't take all of the nuts off because the runner's getting away. So I'm actually going to need to pull this out a little bit to get these nuts completely off. It's the same thing when you go to put this on. The nut that's in front of the runner number 1 and in the middle on the bottom, you have to get those started first, and then you can put the rest of them on because you can't get to them just because of the way the runner's on. And with that, I have another busted knuckle. I don't know why I don't just wear my gloves more often, but I'm going to go ahead and put these on because it is a tight fit. So I think what I'll do next is go ahead and remove wastegate and dump tube. Get those out of there, and then I'll raise the car up, disconnect the downpipe, and I should be able to pull the turbo and manifold out of the car. And actually, before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and remove this upper radiator hose. So guys, I don't know if I actually ever put this in a video, but I did end up switching to tile clamps. Reason being is that the clamps that came with the knockoff wastegate were leaking like crazy. And then once I ordered these, now these clamps are about 30 bucks a piece, and I ordered 2 of them. So it really kind of negates the benefit of getting that wastegate at a good deal. Remember, that's a $100 wastegate. It is an authentic towel, but it didn't come with the fire ring. So my solution to that was to buy a knockoff wastegate for like 60 bucks and then use the fire ring and the clamps and everything that came with that and the fittings. But that has since come back to bite me because, like I said, I ended up buying these towel clamps because the knockoff ones were leaking. So it seems like the better solution is to try to find someone selling a wastegate that includes all your fittings and your clamps. You include the wastegate that's on here, which was 100 bucks, the knockoff wastegate, which was 60 bucks, and then another 60 bucks for these. You know, you're looking at 220, 230 bucks. A bunch of wasted money, a bunch of wasted time. Learn from my mistakes. Just find a complete towel that someone's selling used, or just buy one new. You can actually see on the dump tube where it was leaking. Now, of course, it's a little fainter now just because the towel clamps weren't leaking. And when you get this thing in your hand, you can tell the quality and why it was leaking. I tried to sand that one down so it would grip closer, but this one is just so much better. Even how it's machined around the nut, it allows you to actually grip it, whereas that one isn't. And the nut, and it uses a bigger nut, which just makes installing this thing more difficult. And again, it's a complete waste of time. That thing's probably going in the trash. All right, so now I've got the dump tube out. I'm going to go ahead and remove my AC lines and then get the car jacked up. Yeah, these AC lines are 12s. All right, so those are off. I'm just going to get the AC lines out the way. And I'm gonna put my bolts back. So now that I got that off, I'm ready to jack the car up so I can get to the exhaust and remove that. One thing to mention is that these cars technically don't have a center jacking point. So typically what I'll do is use that center cross member about halfway down it and use that for my center jacking point. But when you do that, you want to keep in mind that brace doesn't run down the middle of the engine. One side of your car is going to lift up faster than the other. So it will be a little uneven when you go to put it on jack stands. So keep that in mind. You don't want to use the bottom of the radiator support. That is not designed to support the car. And that's why, or at least what I believe, is the reason why there's a big dent in the bottom of this one. Somebody tried to jack the car up using that instead of the brace, and it pushed it all up. And for the reason I just mentioned, I want to put my jack pretty far up under here just so that the weight of everything is dispersed evenly and not put it toward the front of the car where it's sitting underneath the radiator support. And you also want to keep in mind that this cross member actually dips down, and of course you don't want to put the jack on that slope because then it can slip. So we're just gonna get it on a flat spot and then get the car jacked up. And I did forget to mention, you want to make sure that your e-brake is on and that you have something behind the rear wheels. When you go to place your jack stand, there's a few ways that you can do it. If you notice, this is your pinch spot because obviously this is a unibody vehicle. You can put it here, and that's perfectly fine. Like some jack stands actually have a cutout right here for this pinch to sit in, but this one doesn't. So I'm just gonna place this pretty close to it. I do want to keep in mind, like I said, that the car isn't exactly even, so one side is going to be maybe half an inch or so higher than the other side. So what I do is count the notches just to make sure that the jack stands are going to be level when I go to set them on. Now that's a beautiful shot right there. So here you can see what I mean about how the cross member dips down. So obviously you don't want to put your jack kind of on that slope, so you want to use one of the flat parts. Typically I go down in the back there, right where it crosses under the transmission. Now while we're under here getting the exhaust loose, I'm also going to remove that cross member, and then of course you have to remove this motor mount. Now if you notice, I've already dropped this once because I put my solid mount in. I felt like it made a difference, and with just that one, it didn't add any noticeable vibration, but the car did feel more responsive, oddly enough. So of course we have two 17s under here. I think that's a 14, and then there should be two 12s in the back. We're going to move those, and that's going to allow us to drop the cross member and then the downpipe. Alright, so next I'm going to take the bolt off to the engine mount. It is a 14. You will need something on the back side of it to hold that nut in place. Not sure if you guys can see this, how I'm using the wrench in combination with the impact to get this bolt out. That is out, so now I can get my 17. There was a bolt in here and then up there, and of course you see these two in the middle hold this piece on for whatever this is. I might just take this off. Assuming this is like a counterweight anti-vibration type thing. I'm not entirely sure what this is on here for, but I think I'm gonna take it off because race car. This is where those 17 millimeters that I was referring to were. So with the cross member out, the next step is to remove the downpipe. Of course, this being a custom setup, my downpipe is actually held on with a V-band clamp. So obviously if your car is stock, it's gonna be a different setup, but the process is still the same. So I'm gonna get back under there and get that loose. So one thing I did forget to mention is that while I'm down there, I did go ahead and remove the hot side intercooler piping, and I'm going to drain the oil. That way, when I come back up top, I can just remove the oil feed line and then pull that thing out of there. Alright, so I got the oil drained. Alright, so that's off. I'll tuck this over here to the side. Alright, so I think I got everything off. Go ahead and get this thing off. Alright guys, so the turbo kit is off the car. For you guys who might be new to the channel, this is a eBay GT35. There's an eBay manifold, or a manifold purchase from eBay. I know how some people get about that. The logo on it says Power Go Motorsports. And as I said, an authentic tile wastegate. Now right here, you may notice it looks a little different. This is actually a spacer that Trey welded in for me to clock the turbo away from the starter. Of course, You guys are familiar with your car, like the starter sits behind the exhaust manifold for some reason, and it typically interferes with most of your turbo kits. This manifold is actually listed for an Evo, but of course it fits on the Hyundai/Kia head. These are little fittings I was talking about that came with the boost controller. These are push lock the hose. Haven't had a problem with those so far. This turbo is oil and water cooled, or can be. I didn't water cool, I just left those ports open. And of course the line that I made, 10 AN fittings that I got from Amazon by a company named Evo Energy. Of course, like I mentioned, the turbo is V-band. Of course, I know I'm going to have some questions on this manifold. It's held up so far, but granted, it's only been on the car for really a few hundred miles. Like, I do believe this thing will crack eventually. It doesn't seem to be all that thick, but so far so good. It's went through a bunch of heat cycles, as you can see. This thing was originally like that bright chrome polished look. All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. We did get the turbo kit completely removed. The engine bay is looking rather sad, but I do have a few plans to upgrade. What you're gonna notice is that the car is gonna start transforming from a budget build to seeing some higher end parts, and I'll bring you guys along for the journey. So I wanna thank you guys once again for watching the video. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Have a great day.